Alright folks, so this is the brand new COROS Pace 3 GPS sports watch, updating their previous generation Pace 2 with new features like a touchscreen, an updated heart rate sensor, and even a dual frequency satellite chipset. The previous generation Pace 2 was, and still is, a really good bang for your buck when it comes to a budget-friendly sports watch with all the features that you'd expect, like the ability to track tons of sports, but it packs in a lot of features that you wouldn't necessarily expect at this price point, including multi-sport and triathlon modes. It also tracks open water swimming, it compares cycling power meters, and it also has an altimeter. And today, COROS is continuing that trend with their third generation Pace 3, which adds a few new features at just a slightly higher price tag. So in today's video, we're going to go over everything new with the brand new Pace 3, including all the new features, how it differs from the previous generation Pace 2, and of course, I'll be going into a lot of detail into the actual sports and fitness performance of this watch with real-world testing for stuff like running, cycling, as well as weight training, just to give you an idea if this device is going to be right for you, and if you're a Pace 2 owner, whether it's worth the upgrade. And if the information in this video does help you out at all, do me a favor and just quickly hit that like button down below. So starting off with price, the Pace 3 gets a slight bump in price, coming in at $229 versus $199 for the previous generation Pace 2. And right now, as of launch, they're offering two different case colors, a white version as well as a black version. And with each, you have a choice of either a silicone band or a nylon band. And then they also have a Pace 3 Track Edition that comes in red, that comes with a nylon band, and that'll be available a little bit later on down the road. And then in terms of dimensions, the Pace 3 also gets a slight bump there as well, where it's just slightly larger than Pace 2, at least in terms of the case diameter. However, they were actually able to make it a little bit thinner because the new updated heart rate sensor that's on the Pace 3 sits a little bit more flush than the previous generation. And then when it comes to weight, it's just barely heavier than the previous generation, but it's still basically that same great lightweight watch that you can barely tell that you're wearing. And what's really great about this for sports is that it just doesn't get in the way. And another thing that lends to its really good wearability are the bands. And this is one area that COROS does a really good job with, where they're not only super comfortable for everyday use, but they also work really great for sports, where they just have this really nice amount of stretch to them, making the watches stay nice and secure on the wrist. And this goes for both the silicone bands as well as the nylon bands. And when it comes to which band that you should choose, well, the silicone band and the nylon band both will work great for sports, but the nylon band does have a bit of an advantage where you can get a little bit more customized fit, and it's also just a little bit lighter if you're looking for the absolute lightest weight package out there. But one minor downside to the nylon band is that it does stay wet for just a little bit after a workout or a shower, so that's something to keep in mind. And another thing I wanted to point out too is that the Pace 3 is just slightly larger than the Pace 2. So unfortunately, the bands aren't backwards or forwards compatible between these two, where the Pace 2 uses 20mm bands and the Pace 3 uses 22mm bands. And then for durability, the Pace 3 uses a nylon fiberglass blend plastic, just like before, but they did mention that they're using a new blend of materials for both the bezel as well as the case, where it's supposed to be just a little bit more rugged than the Pace 2. And the Pace 3 also has a 5 ATM water resistance rating, just like before. And when it comes to the display, they kept with the same size 1.2-inch full-color memory pixel or transflective display with 240 by 240 pixels. However, the Pace 3 does have an updated display that's now brighter. So just like the previous generation Pace 2, that memory pixel or transflective display is great outdoors, which is to be expected with this kind of display technology. But indoors, it's definitely a bit better with its brighter backlight, where it's not only brighter, but also seems to have a bit more contrast. But along with a brighter display, the Pace 3 also now comes with a touchscreen, and they give you a choice of how and when you want to use it. So basically, they have settings where you can have the touchscreen always enabled, or you can enable it just for navigation as well as the activity interface, or you can enable it just for navigation. But other than the touchscreen, the Pace 3 does still retain the same two-button configuration as the Pace 2, with one of those buttons doubling as a digital dial to scroll through all the menus and widgets, and then the other being a back button. But one small change it looks like, though, is that they increased the size of the back button from the previous generation. The Pace 3 also comes with a night mode for the display, and what this does is that it keeps the backlight on during your activity until your activity ends, or 1 hour after sunrise. So this is going to be useful if you're running through the night and you don't necessarily want to rely on the wrist gesture to see your data. Now, when it comes to battery life, they advertise up to 24 days of battery life, but this, just like any other watch out there, will depend on how you use it, as well as what settings you enable or disable, as well as how many outdoor activities that you track. Now, to get that 24 days, that's without sleep tracking, as well as using it in the standard satellite system mode, and they say that's with about 2 to 2.5 hours of outdoor activities per week. But for how I was using it, I had sleep tracking enabled. I was using the default every 10-minute recording interval for heart rate throughout the day. For activity tracking, I was using it with the all satellite systems mode for most of my tests, which by the way was the default mode that it was set to straight out of the box. And then I was using it to track about 7 hours worth of outdoor activities per week. And with that particular use case and those settings, I was on track to get about 8 days of battery life before having to recharge it. And they did mention that sleep tracking does have a big impact on battery life, but I think that a lot of us would want to track that. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there. And then when it comes to battery life for recording outdoor activities, on this ride here, I started out with 61%. And for this particular ride, I really wanted to test out the higher accuracy dual frequency satellite mode. And then I was using wrist-based heart rate and I wasn't using any external sensors. And at the end of this nearly 2-hour ride, it had 50% remaining. And if we do the simple math, that means it was using about 6% per hour, meaning that you could potentially get around 16 hours in that mode. So for outdoor activity tracking, that seems to be very much in line with their claims. Oh, and then when it comes to charging, the Pace 3 also uses the same standard COROS charging cable as before with a USB Type-A connection. The Pace 3 also gets a new heart rate sensor, the same updated 5 LED and 4 photodetector sensor that's found on their latest Apex 2 and Apex 2 Pro sports watches. And this new sensor is supposed to deliver higher accuracy than what was found before on the Pace 2. And I'll have more details on the accuracy in just a bit when we go over the sports and fitness performance. But along with the updated heart rate sensor, another upgrade that the Pace 3 gets is blood oxygen saturation tracking with its pulse oximeter. And then for all the other sensors that it has on board, just like the Pace 2, the Pace 3 has a barometric altimeter, it has an accelerometer, it has a gyroscope, an electronic compass, as well as a temperature sensor, and it also has a wear detection sensor to turn off the heart rate sensor when you're not wearing it to save on battery life. And then for connectivity, the Pace 3 uses Bluetooth 5.0, it also has a Wi-Fi, and then it also has 4 gigabytes of memory. Now what's also interesting here too is that you can actually load music onto the Pace 3 for offline music playback using a pair of Bluetooth earbuds. So that's especially a nice feature for all of you out there who want to go out for a run or ride without your phone. However, this functionality only works with purchased music, like if you have MP3s. So the Pace 3 doesn't have any support for any music streaming services at this time. And then on the smartphone integration side of things, you'll be able to receive one-way notifications, and you will also be able to choose to a point which kind of notifications you actually want to receive on your watch. The Pace 3 also gets their latest software update where you're now able to create custom watch faces from the app, where you can choose between analog and digital layouts. You can also choose the color from some of those layouts, and then you can choose a custom background either from their image library, or you can choose your own photo. And with that new display, I gotta say, even for a display that's on the smaller side of things, you can create some pretty great watch faces here. And then when it comes to daily activity and just general health tracking, the Pace 3 estimates your calories burned throughout the day, it tracks your steps, it tracks your floors climbed, it tracks your heart rate, and then also has sleep tracking where it can also keep track of your sleep stages. And I did find the sleep tracking to work well from the standpoint of tracking the time I went to bed, as well as the time I woke up, as well as the time I spent awake during the night. And in terms of sleep stages, I don't usually dive super deep into the exact accuracy because it isn't necessarily perfected science, but it does seem to resemble the sleep stages that are being collected on some other wearables that I wear, so that's good to see. And then when it comes to activity profiles, the Pace 3 comes with all the activity profiles that came with the Pace 2. And at this price point, just like the Pace 2, it is a really great value here because you're not only getting the common activity profiles like running, cycling, gym profiles, as well as pool swimming, but also comes with open water swimming and triathlon modes and multi-sport modes, profiles that aren't usually seen at this price point. But the Pace 3 also adds a few additional profiles that weren't previously found in the Pace 2, like trail running, hiking, skiing, snowboarding, as well as cross-country skiing. So basically a few more outdoor recreation focused profiles. But don't worry, in true COROS fashion, they are sharing the love with the Pace 2, where the Pace 2 will be getting these additional profiles with an update later this year. And then on the sports feedback side of things, the Pace 3 gives your total exercise time over the course of the last 7 days. It provides your 7-day training load, as well as a distribution of your different intensity levels during training over the last 4 weeks. It provides a training status, and as you can see here, I've been doing a lot of testing, I guess you could say. It also has a recovery time advisor, and it also has a running fitness indicator, as well as a running race predictor for times that you could potentially achieve for common running race instances. And then another feature that the Pace 3 gets, and this was also present with the Pace 2, is the ability to collect running power from the wrist itself for outdoor runs without the need for an external accessory. And speaking of which, when it comes to external accessories like external sensors, the Pace 3 can connect to Bluetooth heart rate sensors, cycling power meters, as well as smart bike trainers. Unfortunately though, this is one area where the Pace 3 kind of went a step back though versus the Pace 2, where the Pace 3 only supports Bluetooth external sensors. It doesn't support ANT+ sensors, which was actually something that you could do on the Pace 2. And then on the navigation side of things, the Pace 3 has breadcrumb style navigation. So what this means is that when you go out to do your outdoor activity, it tracks the path that you've taken. And what you can do here is that you can use it to get back to your start location by backtracking your route. So think like if you're out in the wilderness, or even if you're like in a downtown area and you happen to get lost or something. Happens to me all the time. But in addition to that, the Pace 3 also does have the ability to load in predetermined routes. So what you can do here is load up a route that you can follow along. And you can build your routes using the Explore tool on the COROS app. You can also manually import route files in the flavor of something like a GPX file. And then another way to do this is with Strava, where if you sync up your COROS and Strava accounts, any favorited routes in Strava will just automatically sync over to your COROS route library. And then one more thing in regards to navigation, and this was a feature that was just announced for their public beta program, is that the Pace 3 also does have the ability to display turn-by-turn instructions while navigating. So what happens here is when you do load in a route file, it'll give you turn alerts when you approach a turn or junction in your route. But like I was mentioning, this feature just is in beta at the moment. And another important thing to note is that it's only currently available for road running as well as trail running. It's not available for cycling, and it didn't even seem to work for hiking at the moment. But what really is nice about all these navigation features though is that the Pace 3 does now have that touchscreen, and this makes it just much easier to pan around your route to get a better orientation of where your route either goes or where you came from. And then you can also use the digital dial to zoom in or out. Now, one big way that the Pace 3 differs though from its bigger siblings, the Apex 2 and the Apex 2 Pro, is that the Pace 3 doesn't have built-in maps. So although you do get a breadcrumb route of your path, you don't get the additional context of map imagery that you do get with COROS's higher end offerings. So if you want more details on the Apex 2 or the Apex 2 Pro, I've actually got some videos that I'll have linked down in the description below of those two watches. But the Pace 3 also gets an update when it comes to the satellite chipset with the same dual band or dual frequency satellite technology that's found on their higher end watches. And with this kind of technology, the aim here is to deliver higher accuracy in environments where satellite signals can kind of get iffy, like around really tall buildings, tall rock faces like canyon walls, as well as heavy tree cover. And what I actually wanted to show you today are tests with both the single frequency all satellites mode as well as the higher accuracy dual frequency mode, just to show you the difference. So to start out with, here's a run using the single frequency all satellites mode, and the Pace 3 did great. And then for the finer detail of the GPS tracks, good to go there as well, and it was very solid throughout the entire run. Maybe a smidge off right here on this roundabout, but that's totally splitting hairs. And then for this road ride, again, just using the single frequency all satellite systems mode, good to go here as well. And I also wanted to point out that Pace 3 did a great job with the elevation gate it tracked compared to both the other devices as well as the corrected elevation in Strava. And then when it comes to the GPS tracks, it was pretty solid throughout the ride, where on all the straight sections it held its line well, and on nearly all the corners it's nice and crispy. There were just a handful of corners like here and coming out of the tunnel right here where it wandered just a little bit, but no big deal in the whole scheme of things. Now, when it comes to the highest accuracy dual frequency mode versus using the single frequency all systems mode, just to compare, I actually did nearly the exact same mountain bike ride on back-to-back days just so we can see the difference. So here's the first ride that I did using the all systems single frequency mode, and for the total distance, it was just a little bit short compared to the Garmin Edge 840 I was using, as well as the corrected distance from Strava, which is based off of their maps. However, it is a little bit closer to the Wahoo Element Bolt V2. And if we take a look at the finer detail of the GPS tracks, here's where we can see that on a lot of the turns and switchbacks, the tracks aren't quite as accurate, where it overshoots and cuts some corners. But again, this was using the single frequency mode. And in this type of environment where there's a lot of heavy tree cover, this is exactly what that dual frequency mode is meant for. So let's go ahead and check out a ride I did the very next day to test if it was more accurate. And for the total distance the Pace 3 collected, it's a lot closer this time. And if we take a look at the GPS tracks, it's a lot crispier as well, and more of what I want to see, where the tracks are much more accurate. So there certainly is a difference in terms of accuracy when enabling the dual frequency mode, especially in this kind of environment. But you can see though that there are still just a handful of corners here and there where it does wander just a little bit. So it's not quite as picture perfect as the Garmin Edge bike computer, but still a very respectable result. And then really quick before we get into hardware accuracy, I also wanted to go over how well the Pace 3 did at estimating distances while running indoors in the treadmill. But it was close, but a little bit under what the treadmill reported. Not really that far off in the whole scheme of things when it comes to this kind of estimation. But the nice thing is they do allow you to adjust and calibrate the distance when you go to save your run. Oh, and one thing related to that is that the Pace 3 does have the ability to pair with COROS's Pod 2, and this will improve accuracy both indoors as well as outdoors when it comes to distance and instant pace. And then finally, let's go ahead and wrap things up with heart rate accuracy. So starting out with an indoor bike ride, I mean, that's super solid out of the Pace 3, and this ride even included some intervals. And you can see that it was quite responsive as well as tracking the quick changes in heart rate over the course of the workout. Now, if I had to nitpick about anything on this last interval right here, it was a little bit slow to respond to the quick rise in heart rate, but interestingly, the Pace 3 matched up with the Polar Verity Sense optical heart rate sensor as well, and that's something pretty typical for optical heart rate sensors where they may be just about a second or two behind a chest heart rate strap, just due to the technology. And then for road biking outside, the Pace 3 did pretty well here too for nearly the entire ride. There was this odd little drop right here, but it was momentary and got back in line quickly. With road biking outside, there's certainly more variables to deal with, like vibrations and bumps in the road, which can make the watch move around on your wrist, which can affect accuracy, but the Pace 3 did pretty well here overall. And then for running, the Pace 3 did a pretty good job here too. There was this rather odd momentary spike just kind of out of the blue, but other than that, this is nearly exactly what I want to see. And then I also tested the Pace 3 out for rowing indoors, and this sort of activity starts to introduce challenges for heart rate sensors on watches just due to the gripping onto the handle, but the Pace 3 did pretty well. You can see on the first portion of the workout here where it was waving just a little bit, but after that, it got in the groove. Now, stepping it up yet another notch, let's go ahead and check out some mountain biking. And this, along with weight training, are basically the hardest activities for a wrist-based optical heart rate sensor to get right. And with mountain biking, there's constant gripping onto the handlebars, as well as all the rough terrain, both of which these kinds of sensors don't like. And for the Pace 3, this isn't a terrible result in the whole scheme of things when it comes to mountain biking. Now, it is certainly expected to see some more variance with mountain biking. It's just the nature of this kind of activity, especially like right here in the second half of the ride where I was going downhill over rougher terrain. However, this part right here, this was kind of odd though, because this was just as I was starting out and starting to climb, which isn't usually where you'll see inaccurate results. So that was just a little bit strange. And then finally, when it comes to weight training, this starts to introduce variables like gripping onto dumbbells as well as varying arm movement, which can affect blood flow. And the Pace 3 didn't do all that bad in handling it, where it resembles the trends in heart rate with the exception to this rather large spike here during these bicep curls, and then some shakiness at the end during the high intensity intervals. But for the rest of the workout though, it did sort of line up though with the trends, although it didn't really do that great a job with the bench presses at the beginning. Overall though, the heart rate sensor seems to be pretty good for steady state activities. There were a couple odd hiccups every so often, but overall still usable results. One thing I do want to note though is that the results I got out of the Pace 3 were actually much better than what I got out of the larger Apex 2 and the Apex 2 Pro, even though they share the exact same heart rate sensor. And this kind of goes along with what I've been seeing for years and years of testing these kinds of watches, is that even if two different size watches are using the exact same heart rate sensor, the lighter and smaller watch will likely get more accurate results because it's smaller and lighter and has less of a chance of moving around on the wrist. So overall, I have to say, just like the Pace 2, for the money, the Pace 3 is a really good value. Sure, it's $30 more than the Pace 2, but I think it certainly packs in a lot of features for that extra $30, like the touchscreen as well as the updated sensors. And at this price point, there's really not much else out there that can touch it, especially since it has triathlon support as well as support for cycling power meters. COROS' higher end offerings get a little bit more challenging when comparing them with similarly priced offerings from other brands, but this is COROS' sweet spot. In a nutshell, it's an easy-to-use, feature-packed sports watch without some of the bells and whistles that you may not need, like let's say fancy materials, but it does all the fundamentals well. Anyhow, if you have any questions about the Pace 3 that I didn't cover in this video, feel free to drop a comment down in the comment section down below. And if you found the information in this video useful, do me a favor and just quickly hit that like button and also subscribe to the channel for plenty more sports tech videos that are literally right around the corner. Thanks so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video.